Okay, I think we'll begin now. Well, thank you all for being here, for taking time out of your evening to listen to this webinar. I guess this webinar is an opportunity for us to introduce ourselves, introduce Verdantia Research, and kind of explain the research that we've done up until this point. So I'm going to begin the presentation, then I'm going to hand over to Raphael Spiekermann, the other co-founder of the company. And then he's going to talk a bit more about his research, then I'm going to take over afterwards. And then afterwards, we're going to have Q&A. So the presentation is going to take about 30 minutes. And then after those 30 minutes, we're going to have some questions. So if you can't hang around for those questions, all of this is going to be recorded, including the questions, and that'll all be sent to you. If you want to ask any questions, if you look at kind of your dashboard on Zoom at the bottom, it says the Q&A. You just click that button and then ask questions. Any thoughts, comments, questions, just whack them in there, and then we'll do our best to answer them at the end. So we've got a lot to get through, so I'll start the presentation. So to begin, we'll talk give an introduction to silvopastoral systems, what we mean by them. We'll then talk about our previous research that's got us up to this point. We'll then talk about trials we've done in Taranaki. And finally, we'll kind of think about the future and I guess our vision for these systems. So I'm Tom Mackay-Smith. I'm a landscape ecologist and soil scientist, and I used to work for Massey University. I emigrated to New Zealand about 5 years ago. I am from the UK originally, but my grandfather was a Kiwi. He was from an old farming family, so I was keen to come back here to explore my heritage. This is Raphael. He's a geomorphologist and spatial modeler, and he used to work for Manaaki Whenua Research, and he grew up just outside of Taihape. And we're scientists with nearly 2 decades combined experience researching silvopastoral systems. So we've been thinking about these things for a long time, but we definitely don't have all the answers far from it. But we're just really interested in, designing these systems to maximize their benefits and also meeting people that are also interested in them. When I say silvopastoral systems, I'm specifically referring to these things. So when you integrate trees within pasture, and animals can graze in and around the trees. This is a system with oak in Spain, and it's literally been used for millennia to balance agricultural production and the environment. These systems, of course, also exist in New Zealand, with poplar and willow the most classic example. And this is the best example I've found with natives. It's on a farm in Hawke's Bay. The farmer likely didn't plant these trees, but they were selectively thinned over time. Now we're going to talk about our research that's kind of got us up to this point. So this is a question that I'm particularly interested in and I think about far too often. And it's, can we use native silvopastoral systems to increase farm profitability? I mean, the environmental benefits of planting trees is clear. There's so much work done on that. But I think we have to remember that farms are businesses. They sustain the country and they sustain rural areas. And I think if we're going to design these systems, we have to think about how they're going to fit into the farm, because it's a business, and how it's going to impact the farm bottom line. And my overall aim is that these systems become win-win innovations where they can overcome economic and environmental trade-offs. And I really think this is the way forward, more so than strong regulation, regulating businesses out of business. So how on earth are we going to potentially increase pasture production with native trees? So here are some results from some work I did at Massey during my PhD. And we basically compared pasture production around Carnuka trees with pasture production away from Carnuka trees. And we did this at 2 sites, one in the Hawke's Bay and one in the Wairarapa. And in this study, we found pasture production was 109% greater under the Carnuka trees. So these results, really blew us away, and we didn't expect to get this different. So we found almost double the amount of grass. Well, we did find double the amount of grass around the Carnuka trees compared with open pasture. And you can quite clearly see the tree effect here. This is all a sloping slope, so it's about 20 to 25 degrees. And the pasture was very similar here with the area on the flat areas in the paddock. We also found 50% more organic matter under the trees, 116% more Olsen P under the trees, 635% more perennial ryegrass under the trees, and 855% more coxswain under the trees. So we not only had a complete transformation in the soil environment, but this led to a complete change in the botanical composition, to more productive species, which led to the higher pasture production. All this stuff is being published, so if you're interested to find out more, just give me an email afterwards, I can send this to you. And this photo here just kind of shows that tree effect. You can quite clearly see the tree effect around all these trees. And we could, it was like this over much of the farm. So it was really awesome to see. But the question you're probably all wondering is, why was this happening? And I'm sure many of you have thoughts of your own. So the main thing people say to me when they hear these results is it was nutrient redistribution. So animals were moving nutrients from away from the trees to under the trees. They were, pasture production was going down away from the trees. It was increasing under the trees, and there was no net improvement at the paddock scale. We definitely agree there was a massive livestock effect happening here. We don't just think it's nutrient redistribution. We think they were also grazing under the trees. There was more turnover. This is leading to more pasture species that the livestock want to eat, and it's this positive feedback loop we were getting under the trees. And this happens naturally. Nutrients normally go from the steeper areas of the paddock to the flat areas of the paddock. So how can we spatially design these systems and farms to actually move it the other way? Could we potentially put native space-planted systems on the slopes and actually move nutrients from the flat areas to the steeper areas, so animals have a choice between the flat area or the steeper area with shade, and spatially design these systems for this? Trees also add organic matter to the soil, and these trees, are 80, 90 years old. So you can imagine if there's a bit of organic matter added to the soil each year, this is likely going to compound over time. So here's some other tree effects. We didn't find evidence of these tree effects at our sites, but still, anecdotal evidence is still evidence. And it's really interesting to see this. So this was a video in the Wairarapa. It was bone dry. Kind of typical summer dry. And then when you kind of walked under this, it was actually a Manuka scrub area. The grass was completely green. And this was kind of quite amazing to see, actually, and see the potential of what trees could potentially do. So we didn't study this place, so it's completely anecdotal, but just, interesting to see. Another photo. So away from the trees, you can see it's all frozen. This was near Dannevirke. This was a cold winter morning and lots of rushes. And guess where all the animals are? And when you go under the trees, no frost, no rushes. And the basic point is, can we use trees to moderate climate in the summer and the winter? So obviously it's not a panacea, you do get livestock camping effects. We're very well aware of that. But this is a photo from the same farm, and you can see there are no camping spots in some areas. So we're really interested in think about how we can design these systems to minimize the negative effects and maximize those positive effects. I mean, we're not at a point to say, if you plant this tree in this part of the country, this is the production you're going to get. We want to do more research to get to that point, but that's definitely where we're aiming for. And we've seen this tree effect on many farms around the country, and we're just quite excited about it, really. Awesome. Hope you're all still with me. I can't hear you all, but I'm going to presume you all still are. So now I'm going to kind of discuss some other benefits you might see from these systems. So our overall thesis is we view these systems, our aim is to help make farms more productive, but also more resilient for literally hundreds of years. And one way we might do this, is carbon credits. So obviously this is quite a controversial topic. Some people love them, some people hate them. But we did some work on this. And I'm not going to go into the details of the ETS because we don't have that much time. But if you want more information on how the ETS works, just flick me an email and I'll try and answer it best I can. So we did some work and we calculated sequestration rate for a low density system with Manuka. And we found you would get $185 per hectare per year over 30 years. So we calculated the net present value over 30 years and annualized that, and we used a 5% discount rate. And we also accounted for the cost of planting and also the cost of ETS registration. This would be pure profit. Biodiversity, and there's also talk about biodiversity credits along with Hewaka Ekanoa. And this is a study we did in the Wairarapa, and we found 191% more native birds in Kānuka silver pasture sites via open pasture. So really cool results there as well. Soil erosion. This is something Raphael, who's going to speak a bit later, is an expert in. So I'll let him talk about that. But obviously, if you plant trees, you can reduce soil erosion that way. And finally, livestock welfare obviously provides shade, good for welfare. But how does that relate to performance? This is the best study I've found in New Zealand. I think this is a really understudied area that we're going to hope to rectify moving forward. But it found cows grazed for 41 minutes longer per day with tree shade, with willow tree shade, on days hotter than 25 degrees. So really interesting results there. So we did all this research, we came up with, some interesting results, but the key question people said, or the challenge they had is, how on earth are you going to plant trees, native trees within paddocks? So we decided to do a trial, try and answer this question. So I was at Massey at the time, and I teamed up with Raphael at Whenua and Ian McIver at Plant and Food, and we did a 3-year trial in 2021. And we planted 30 seedlings on 3 farms, and we did 2 aspects per farm. And this is what one of the designs looked like. This was in the Hawke's Bay. We got really, really interesting results, and we planted the trees at a 10 by 10 spacing. I probably would have done it a bit less in hindsight, but this was the first time I think this has been done with Kānuka, so obviously, we're still learning. We use these KBC tree tubes to protect the seedlings. Unfortunately, in the paddocks that had cattle in, a lot of them got destroyed. Some of them got completely taken out. So a whole planting in some paddocks got completely taken out. So they're not really fit for purpose. We also did a poplar trial next door to this trial, and we tested this Tree Guard NZ. It's actually a UK company, Cactus Tree Guards. Again, some of them got knocked over. They're also very expensive, difficult to use and assemble. And it was really conversations, on the slopes where we kind of decided to form Verdantia. And we thought, why isn't there a decent tree guard available that farmers can use to plant trees in paddocks? So our first aim really is just to develop a cost-effective tree guard so you can plant any tree you want to plant in the presence of cattle. And we think this is a huge gap, not only in New Zealand, but globally. We also want to remove the barriers to adoption and provide advice. There's so many moving parts of planting trees. Who's going to plant? Where are you going to plant? Why are you going to plant? What are you going to plant? How are you going to do it? Who's going to do the ETS registration? We really want to simplify that whole process, collect a lot of that knowledge, so you can just get the trees and get the value and focus on farming. We also want to continue doing cutting-edge science into silvopastoral systems. We view ourselves as a research organization at heart. And so the tree guard's really the how. How are you going to plant trees in paddocks? And this is the why. What's the value you're going to get? What are the benefits you're going to get on your farm? So in 2023, we received some funding from Agmar and Venture Taranaki, their Curious Minds program, to help develop this tree guard and do native silvopasture trials in Taranaki. So we had 3 sites for this project. And this is what our tree guard looked like. So it's basically 2 waratahs and it's protected by a plastic sheet. We've subsequently improved on this design, and we have a new design coming out in 2025, hopefully, but this design has been working really, really well. And this is the guard being used in a really tough paddock. Bulls have been in this paddock, quite large cows, and they've been performing really, really well. So we're really excited about the results here. This is one of our sites in New Plymouth, and we planted 20 Kānuka seedlings, and we've had 100% survival so far. This is one of our sites near Strathmore. This is Patui Farm, owned by the Native Forest Restoration Trust. Here we've got 18 Kānuka and 18 lemonwood growing, and we've had 100% survival so far as well. And the lemonwoods at this site are really, really shooting. This is the final site in Taranaki. This is near Uranui, and we have 18 Kānuka and 18 lemonwood growing here, and we've had 100% survival so far. So now we're going to kind of, that's kind of where we're up to now. And now we kind of want to think about the future. And where to from here, really? And the first thing I want to say before I hand over to Raphael is we see this as only just the beginning. You know, we've done a lot of work to get to this point, but there's still a lot of work to be done. We think there's a lot of potential in these systems to provide a lot of good to farms, and we really want to, you know, help move that. And this is really the question that Raphael is going to kind of try and talk about and answer and discuss how we might do this. And this question we really think about a lot as well. You know, how can we optimize farms for a range of functions? So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to pass over to Raphael.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And while I share my screen, just remind you all that if you have a question, you can use the Q&A tab below in your panel, on the Zoom panel, to ask a question, just because I saw a raised hand. Okay, so I'm going to spend the next minute showing an example of how optimization can lead to benefits, both in terms of a more effective outcome, but also in monetary terms. So this landslide case study is based on 3 years of my PhD research, which I undertook at Massey University, just like Tom, while I was based at Verdantia Research in Palmerston North. Now, optimization has a lot to do with the right tree in the right place, which, besides being a popular slogan, is generally about describing the viability of different tree species for different landscapes. And I like to think about it in terms of functions trees perform depending on the desired outcome. So I might want to pursue many different outcomes, such as slope stability or shade and shelter for livestock, but we generally can conceive of these outcomes as being nested within a hierarchy or a priority structure. And I'll touch again on this at the end of my talk, but I would suggest that the primary reason we plant trees in New Zealand's pastoral hill country is because of images like this. So this was the impact of a rainfall event in March of 2022 in the East Cape, and since then we've obviously had Cyclone Gabriel, and they produce, you know, very high density of these types of slips with long debris tails. My PhD research was aimed at connecting catchment erosion sources and sediment-related water quality, and specifically to quantify the effectiveness of trees in reducing erosion and sediment delivery. And with the help of semi-automated remote sensing techniques, I built a landslide inventory by mapping from high-resolution imagery in the Wairarapa. And these landslides are basically empirical observations that can be used to build statistical models called landslide susceptibility models. And the idea here is very simple. It's to classify the land into stable and unstable areas using explanatory variables such as rock type, slope angle, aspect, and so forth. And the higher the probability of an area being classified as unstable, the more likely it is that this will be a site of future landsliding. And it's just important to understand the basics there. Now, as shown by this example farm that I'm going to use, the challenge in these silvopastoral environments is how to account for these widely spaced trees. You can see there's a lot of vegetation present, and we ultimately want to know how effective are these trees at preventing future landsliding. Now, new technologies enable us to map and identify these individual trees. You can also classify the tree crowns using high resolution imagery. So we can see here the purple Carnica, the yellow poplar and willows, and the blue coniferous species, as well as some eucalypt there. Now, I included these representations of individual trees in a landslide susceptibility model, alongside other important factors I mentioned before, like slope gradient. And the basis for this model were these 43,000 landslide scars that I mapped in the red. You can see it over this 840 square kilometre area. And here's the resulting landslide susceptibility map for the same farm. And the spatial predictions are then classified into these three classes of low, medium, and high. And based on the characteristics of previous landslides, we would expect that approximately 80% of future landslides would be located in these red zones, and a further 15% in the yellow, and 5 in the green. So the red zones are much more problematic from a landslide erosion point of view. And the maps can also be used to illustrate the effectiveness of the right tree in the right place, but also the right tree in the wrong place, at least from a slope stability point of view. And I'm showing this in an animation, and beginning with a prediction where the existing vegetation has been removed, showing a treeless pasture-only baseline, which is again shown here in the top left. We can see that there's a eucalyptus grove in the orthophoto on the right, and without any trees present, this area here would be considered highly susceptible to landslide erosion. Now, counting for the trees present, this same area is shown by the model to now be green, which means stabilized. And on the further west, we see a lot of poplars and willows in this basin. And the pattern between the pasture-only baseline and the actual tree cover doesn't change a lot. And that's simply because a lot of these trees are located in the valley bottoms and on lower slopes that are less steep, and where we wouldn't be expecting landslides to occur with or without trees present. So here the eucalyptus grove, just to give you an idea on the steep slopes. Now, if retaining soil and slopes isn't the only priority, but also sediment and water quality outcomes, then we need to link hill slopes to streams. And you can see in this photo that there are some landslides that clearly deliver sediment to the adjacent stream channel and others that don't to the same degree. And so I developed a landslide connectivity model which informs on the likelihood of a landslide delivering sediment to streams based on mapping on this 1977 image in the Wairarapa. This is what the resulting spatial prediction looks like. High values close to 1 indicate that if landslides are triggered here, they are likely to deliver sediment to the channel. Now, these maps can be integrated with the landslide susceptibility maps that inform on where landslides are likely to occur in future. And when we do this, we end up with a map showing the potential for landslide-derived sediment delivery to streams. And a similar story is shown here, as I just showed before, although some of those steep upper slopes are now no longer red but green. That is, they're unlikely to be a sediment source, since landslides triggered here will likely deposit on the slopes rather than into the stream channels. Now, I ran scenarios for 50 farms in the Wairarapa Hill Country to quantify the reductions in sediment delivery from shallow landslides to streams, shown on the map there, based on the actual tree cover, shown in this window B, a targeted approach where we map those highly susceptible and highly connected areas, and a scenario where we canopy plant, we basically blanket plant the entire farm in a 15 by 15 meter spacing of poplars, and always compared to a treeless pasture-only baseline. So here are the key results. Only 6.5% of the land area of these 50 farms turned out to be both highly susceptible to shallow landsliding and also have high potential for sediment delivery to stream networks. So it's a very small fraction of the farm area that is the problem area. Targeting this area would result in a reduction in sediment delivery of 24% across the 50 farms and at a much lower cost compared to a non-targeted approach. In fact, I calculated a 10-fold increase in cost effectiveness of measures by applying a targeted approach to erosion and sediment mitigation. Now, a lot of these studies have been published, and obviously, just like Tom, happy to share them with you if you're interested in the nitty-gritty and the discussions within them. And now, just to summarize, the right tree in the right place can be very effective at achieving outcomes. That's what I've demonstrated. That's the first key point. And based on this case study, the right tree and right place can only be identified once the outcome or the priority is set. So I've showed you would plant different areas, slightly different areas, if landslide erosion is the desired outcome versus sediment delivery to streams. And yes, there are overlaps, but actually the required treatment is significantly different. And at Verdantia Research, we aim to optimize farm landscapes to achieve more profitable farms with cost-effective measures. That is our priority. Okay, and final slide from me. We've given this a lot of thought already, and this is a figure from a very recent publication in the New Zealand Journal of Agricultural Research. It's basically an idealized illustration of how different trees can perform different functions depending on variation in geomorphology and the desired outcomes. So from riparian vegetation to trap contaminants, through to shelter belts, to planting wider spaced trees in rolling hill country and optimizing pasture production, and through to plantings on steeper slopes aimed at erosion sediment control, and also native vegetation, maybe in gullies aimed at biodiversity outcomes and so forth. So there are obviously co-benefits to all these plantings, but I do believe thinking about a hierarchy and prioritization is important. And with that, I'd like to hand back to Tom.
Thank you, Raphael. So I'll just finish up quickly. Yeah, so just to kind of finish up, just going to talk, tangibly about what we're doing this year and in 2025. So that's kind of where we want to get to. We want to try and optimize farms for a range of functions, decide where on farms different types of trees are going to be good for different things. But in the 2024 planting season, we're actually providing farmers with native silvopastoral systems, and this includes the tree guards, the planting, and the management. So next year in 2025, we hope to release the tree guard, but we're not doing that this year because we basically want to work with farmers to develop these systems around the North Island. And we've teamed up with a number of organisations: Toy Foundation, Auckland Council, Greater Wellington, Taranaki Regional Council, Kaipara Moana Remediation Programme, to basically help develop these systems for the North Island. So we're providing 2,600 guards this year across Taranaki, Hawke's Bay, Northland, and Wairarapa. So we've had an amazing response so far, which has been really awesome. But we have a number of trial opportunities because of our funders. So we kind of wanted to share these with you to see if anyone here, might be interested in developing these systems with us. So for any Taranaki farmers in the audience, we're looking for hill country farmers with suitable sites to trial Kānuka and Riwa as soil conservation species. We're looking for 2 to 3 farms, and this is a fully funded opportunity by the Toy Foundation and Taranaki Regional Council. So it really is a great opportunity whilst we're in this kind of first R&D phase. And finally, in Hawke's Bay, we're looking for hill country farmers wanting to plant around 3 hectares of Kānuka and Riwa as soil conservation species. We're looking for a summer dry and a summer wet trial site, and this will likely be 75% co-funded by Hawke's Bay Regional Council. We've just put in an application to the Innovation Fund. So 2024 is really an R&D phase. We're working with organisations to develop these systems and continue to do trials whilst we build our knowledge. And 2025 is really when we kick off and we try and expand within the North Island. We're aiming to plant 9,000 trees with our guards, plus the sale of our guards in 2025. But any farmers not out there, or just want to keep updated with us, we have a monthly newsletter that will contain our research thoughts and ideas. So I've added everyone that's in the webinar here to that newsletter. We all get loads of emails the whole time. If you're not interested, just unregister. But the aim of this is really to make it punchy, interesting, thought-provoking, and really just share our thoughts on the topic of land management and silvopastoral systems. None of these corporate newsletters. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for taking your time out of your evening to be here. And now we're gonna hear some questions. So the questions will continue a bit past the 30 minutes, but we'll start with the first one. So what carbon price did you use for the calculation for Kānuka over 30 years? Yes. That's a really good question. People use different estimates for this, obviously. So I actually I assumed that it would increase at 5% each year for the next 30 years. And that's basically assuming that the share price doesn't increase above and beyond the rate of inflation if we assume inflation is 5%. I think that's a pretty good estimate, because if carbon credits, become a big thing, if all companies have to pay for their emissions, I think the price would go dramatically higher. We are producing a report for this piece of work, and we will produce different carbon price estimates, because there is another set of estimates that we're working with an agricultural economist, for those estimates. But I can send you the report when we finalize that, Greg. Next question. What characteristics did you use to select Carnuka, then later Lemonwood for these systems? Yeah. So our kind of thinking on this is it's about where what you want the tree to do. So we decided to choose Carnuka and Lemonwood because they're smaller species. We think they will produce less competition with the pasture, and they will create a better balance, with pasture production. So if you're planting the trees to potentially have an impact on pasture production and shade, you might choose trees with one characteristic. But if you want to plant trees, that are going to grow more quickly and then, stabilize the slopes, you might want to plant other species. So that's why we're kind of really every year we're extending the species that we're trying to basically create this suite of species that have different attributes that are then good for different things. But there's a lot to consider here, the growth rate of the species, and all these different things. So yeah. Do you want to add anything, Raphael?
No, I think you've covered it, but I think the light transmissivity is a big one. So the morphology of the tree, also thinking about animal welfare, how the morphology of the tree impacts on animal welfare, how much sunlight can penetrate through the canopy, litter fall, whether it's distributed throughout the year, and how that affects pasture production. Those are all relevant factors as well.
Yeah. So what kind of growth rates could you expect for Carnuka in Taranaki? Yeah, so the trials in Taranaki are less than a year old, but we expect the trees to go very quickly in Taranaki, because we did a trial in Taumarunui, and it's kind of a similar climate. It's quite humid, rains a lot, but also gets quite hot. And the average growth rate for Carnuka was about about 70 centimeters per year. Some of them are growing over a meter a year. So that some of them at that trial site are over 3 meters now. So they're really, really shooting. On the trials we've done in Taranaki, Lemonwoods have actually grown about this much. We haven't done the measurements yet. I'm doing that at the end of summer. Carnukas have grown a bit less than that, but I expect Carnuka to shoot in the second year. But yeah, really strong growth. You kind of expect that in Taranaki. What are you hearing about the future of biodiversity credits? Anything I say now is speculation. Obviously, no one knows what people are going to do in the future or the government's going to do. But I have spoken to a number of people that think, that could be a possibility. I think there was a report was produced that kind of tossed the idea out there. Yeah, so we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but the way I see it, I see, everything going kind of one way. And, I view these, these systems as a way to take positive action despite that, kind of like a hedge, and then also it could potentially improve production, livestock stuff as well, if we can kind of show that. But yeah, I can look for that report as well. I also know someone at Ag First that's kind of working in that space, and they're kind of discussing that at the moment, but there's nothing formalized yet, I don't think. So it probably wouldn't be for 5, 10 years, 15 years. But yeah. What's the likely cost for the tree guard? Yeah. So yeah, we haven't decided on the exact price, but we're thinking of marketing it around between $26 and $29 for the guard. It kind of depends on a few things and how a few things work out, but that's the price that we're sitting at now. For our planting package this year, we've been selling it for $50, which includes the guard, planting, and management. But that's actually a below break-even cost for us because we have a number of grants that help subsidize our wages. So yeah, next year it's going to be more expensive than that because obviously we need to break even. We kind of view the next couple of years as this R&D phase where we're just going to, provide it at a break-even cost or around that point. But yeah, the guard will probably be $27, $28, $29.
So I'll take this next one, Tom.
Yeah.
Is your spatial prediction tool available for farmers and councils? If so, how? That's a good question. So this work that I presented today was undertaken at Manaaki, Whenua, Verdantia Research, and we have, well, when I say we, Manaaki, Whenua has undertaken work for regional councils doing landslide susceptibility modelling at regional scale. So these models do exist for certain regions, such as the Hawke's Bay, the Horizons region, and can be made available through the councils, and there are some gaps in the country. In terms of applying these models at farm scale, we're still working through how that can be implemented. I know my successor at Verdantia Research continues to do work on sediment connectivity modelling, and yeah, it's something that we are very keen on. We're focused on implementation at farm scale, whereas Verdantia Research is more focused on the research undertaken at regional to national scale. So yeah, definitely keen to provide something in future.
Do you have any concerns that carnic and lemonwood have a really limited lifespan? I'd probably, well, yeah, I guess it depends what you would kind of class as a limited lifespan. But the carnicas that I studied in the Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay, we could confirm they were about 90 years old, and they didn't look like they were dying anytime soon. So I kind of, again, we haven't done any radio, when you kind of do the core and work out the exact age of the trees. But I expect carnica to live up to 150 years per tree. So if you kind of compare that to, say, poplar, it might, well, yeah, poplar would last, I guess it depends how you manage it, but some poplars, the recommended practice is kind of felling after 40, 50, 60 years. So we kind of view natives as potentially having a much longer lifespan than those type of species, and kind of form this, in our lifetime, permanent addition to farms. Lemonwood I can't comment on because I've seen very few species, individual specimens growing within paddocks. But yeah, and this is something we will consider when we design these systems. What trees, are going to have the longer lifespan. And the other thing in lifespan, it's also about, the morphology of the tree. And if we think smaller trees that are more going to be less influenced by wind will, I guess, have a better chance of living for a longer period of time. And also the smaller the tree will have less management associated with them as well. Our aim is to really design these systems so, they're there for, for basically, hundreds of years.
Yeah, and also historic aerial photography is something that we've used to try and date these trees, and these photos go back to the 40s, sometimes earlier, and you can then map these trees off those photos, and that provides a bit of a minimum estimate in terms of age. So we do know that carnica trees, for example, can age beyond 100 years for sure. So this is really developing resilient landscapes for the long term. And I'll just take that next question then. In how many years do you expect to repair the watershed and effectively stop erosion? Well, that's a good question. So for example, that farm that I was showcasing today in the Wairarapa has undertaken planting of various species since the 1950s. And there are still areas on that farm that would require further treatment. And it's also important to understand that a tree will reduce the likelihood of a landslide occurring, but a landslide can still occur in the presence of trees. That's why we do still have landslides occurring in native bush, also in forestry areas. So it's not like a 100% reduction that you're ever going to achieve. So repairing means reducing effectively the impact of landslide erosion and sediment delivery to improve water quality. And yeah, it's definitely a long-term process. I mean, you know how long it takes to plant trees. It's a successive process. Trees take time to grow, to establish, and once established, they start to actively prevent erosion. So it's a long-term game. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I can answer this one. Yeah, so all these questions we want to answer. So, you know, the next couple of years, we plan to kind of extend the research that we've done and continue to do more research into the effects of individual trees on all these type of things. Yeah, so it is something that we plan to do. Yeah, and I'll do that one. Did you consider Manuka stacking functions, for example, honey, bee production combined with pasture and grazing? Yes, lots of people ask me about this, and the problem I have a limited knowledge about you know, the honey industry, but from what I've kind of read and what I've heard, I think bees don't necessarily like Manuka or Carnuka flowers, and so you need kind of a higher density area. So I was reading in a report, and they were saying how the bees prefer clover flowers. So then, if you have a low density system, the bees are more likely going to go to the clover flowers, and then you're not going to get kind of more pure honey from Manuka and Carnuka. The report did say that potentially you could hard graze the paddock at the time when the species is flowering, so that potentially could be an option. But yeah, for now we're kind of just focused on that individual tree effect. But it's something we would like to test in the future and think about that as a possibility for sure. But you would also be able to get multiflora honey as well, a different, you know, if it was in a low density system.
Final question.
Yeah, I could do the first one, I guess, and then you could do the second one. I guess that, yeah, the answer, yeah, the Carnuka question earlier. The aim is minimal. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Restate the question, Tom.
Oh, yeah. What maintenance requirements do the species you use have? And what do you think is the right density for silvopastoral planting? Yeah, so the maintenance, the aim is that it's little to no. Well, our aim is no maintenance. And the Carnukas we've seen growing, we expect them to have very, very little maintenance. Again, our knowledge on this will grow as the trees we've planted grow, and so we can watch that over time. But the trees that the Carnukas that are, you know, 80, 90 years old, sometimes, you know, a big branch, well, one of the branch would come down, but it's more manageable than, say, like a massive poplar thing coming down. And the other thing is with the guards. So normally when the Carnukas grow in paddocks, they grow like multi-stems. Yeah, so we're thinking potentially with the guard, the Carnuka will grow more straight, so it won't have this multi stemmed habit, which may potentially reduce that as an impact. But yeah, shall I let you do the next one, Raphael?
The one on density.
Yeah.
What is the right density for silvopastoral planting? I mean, like I was showing in the idealized illustration, I think there are different densities depending on the outcome. So if you're focused on pasture production, I think the spacings would be wider. For example, something like 15 to 20 meters. But if you're planning primarily for erosion control, you probably want a higher density than that, especially if you're interested in the carbon credits, where a minimum canopy cover is required. So I don't think there's one rule for all landscapes. I think it needs to be adapted according to what the geomorphology is and what the desired outcome is.
Obviously, you got. Oh yeah, sorry.
2 more questions have popped up.
Yeah, obviously you guys have focused on natives in this presentation, but have you been following some of the projects overseas who are using trees to provide food to livestock, apples, persimmons, types of fruits? Just wondering, just interested in hearing your opinions on whether that would be something you'd ever include in future research. Yeah. I mean, the thing with this is there's so much to do. We just view this as the tip of the iceberg. I think the biggest gap, especially in New Zealand, has been establishing trees other than poles in paddocks. And so we think that's kind of how we view the guard as an enabler of all these different potential land uses using trees. So obviously in Spain, they provide nuts to the animals. Yeah, and we have been focused on natives because I think, well, I think natives will have a lot of benefits. We've done the most work on natives so far in terms of their individual tree effects, but we do want to also extend into exotics in the future. Yeah, so we basically we want the right tree for the job, basically, and yeah, that's kind of our aim. But I do think, you know, natives will have a lot of benefits in terms of, you know, these individual impacts on pasture, but also longevity of the tree, etc.
I think we'll take these final 2 questions, Tom, before wrapping up. And if you have any further questions that you think of, you're always welcome to email us, tom@verdantiaresearch.co.nz or raphael@verdantiaresearch.co.nz.
Yeah, my email will be on the wrap up email on the Zoom webinar. So are you considering natives to create controlled grazing areas, planting natives for the purpose of grazing them for fodder? Yep, again, it's something that's really interesting. I know they were doing some work at Massey on this, at Tua Parker. Yeah, so no, we haven't focused on, I guess our focus right now is on this individual tree effect because we have these amazing results, and I think there's a lot of potential in that. But also, you know, you could potentially plant tree, you know, animals also graze native trees, and so you could plant trees and feed fodder to the animals as well. And it's something, you know, we'd like to consider as one of our options in the future as well. So definitely we would like to research that. There are shrubby and nitrogen fixing species that you can use between the trees to prepare the understory. Yeah, this is true. I guess my thought there is how it would also affect the pasture in terms of, yeah, the species that you're going to put there, how that would affect the pasture. But you can also potentially use nitrogen fixing trees as well. Yeah, and repair the understory. I guess we also view the way using the tree itself could help repair the understory. And if the focus of the management of the farm is on the pasture, I guess we think that, yeah, the tree itself would help with the pasture.
Just like in your results, Tom, the botanical composition beneath the canopy was completely different to the open pasture. And in essence, that is also a repairing of the understory.
Yeah, it's how you can use trees to modify the microclimate and then create a better environment for, you know, things to flourish. That's kind of the essence of it. Great. Well, thank you so much for being here, everyone. I think we'll wrap it up there. If you have any questions, comments, just, you know, send us an email. I'd love to hear from you, and you'll get the recording from us as well. Have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you.